Okay, next one. This is from Rick from Edgewood, and it's on the Columbia River Treaty. Rick says, I would like to know from each candidate what they think the Canadian preference should be when the Columbia River Treaty converts to on-call flood control in September 2024. So he sort of gives two choices. What should the Canadian preference be? Number one, continued flow regulation according to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers schedule. Or number two, flow regulation to support Canadian energy and environmental objectives. So this one, we're going to start with Katrina.
Thanks, Jan. And I think I need to declare an obvious bias here. Or I don't know. Just because I've been so passionately involved with the Columbia River Treaty and what it's done for our community, and I've just been never more honored than to be the voice of the Columbia River Treaty, not only for when I was a critic in opposition, but also as a minister responsible. And the flow, people think that the treaty ends in 2024. It doesn't actually. The treaty doesn't end in 2024. The treaty itself, either jurisdiction, the Americans or us, have to give 10 years notice if we want the treaty to end. Neither jurisdiction has given notice, so we will continue to negotiate the Columbia River Treaty. The on-call is a separate entity from the treaty. That does end in 2024. And that is part of the discussions we're having. And it's interesting from my perspective, of course, I'd like to see more control to the Canadian side of the border. I think that it's been difficult for communities when we see the drop in, the pool goes up and down, when you have full pool down in Roosevelt and Lake Roosevelt across the line, and you have very low levels of water in the upper Arrow Lake. It's tough. It's tough for our communities. It's tough for the, for the people that are coming to visit our communities, for tourism. It's just, so, we need to look at a better way of ensuring that system's going to work for both sides of the border. But we definitely have been impacted by it far more than the Americans have. And I think it's something that we need to seriously look at. Again, it's, there are discussions that are ongoing, but we need to make sure that we can have the ability to maintain full pool on our side of the border as well. So thanks for that question.
Okay, next, Glenn.
Hi, thanks. This is something that if I was elected in, I would want to spend a lot of time talking to local people and local groups. I know there's a lot of people in the riding who are very passionate about this issue, and it's not something that I've been involved with a lot. So that would be something that I would really want to talk to people about, learn about the history. I know there's a lot of history about the reservoirs and the Columbia River Treaty, and that I would very much want to talk to people and find out their opinions and their thoughts on the issue, and then make a decision after doing that. Thanks.
Thank you, Glenn. And Fletcher.
Yeah, as Katrina said, the treaty has to be taken to the table and begun the discussion, and that's going to have to be a collaborative process between the two sides of the line, right? I mean, we need to be looking at water increasingly as the resource that we have. I mean, I sat down one day and looked at the Slocan Lake. It's worth $4 billion in water if it was sold in Los Angeles, right? So, I mean, with the way that we're treating water, the way that we need to consider water, and the way that we need to look at maintaining the water in the uphill position, essentially to generate the power for the Canadian power producers, is quite important, but it serves a bigger purpose in the ecosystem. And I think we've put the dams in place for the benefit of the Americans. They paid to have the Columbia Basin Trust, essentially supported and started. And that money's done great things. But when that money begins to be less important than the resource that you're managing, I think we need to look at it from the perspective of the people that are influenced by it. And so, yeah, holding the water back, maintaining cheaper power. I mean, we're looking at building new dams so we can generate hydroelectric power, and yet we would pay the water out sooner in overflow so that we don't hold it back for Canadian power producers. So absolutely, I think we need to take this and we need to sit down, and it is ongoing discussions. I mean, I was part of the Lower Columbia Community Development Team Society, and there was always conversations, and we had a member that dealt with the treaty and dealt with the water, and he was also a member of the Columbia Basin Trust Board, right? So there are negotiations, there's discussions. I think the public needs to be a little bit more involved in them, and it's, you know, it's not referendum in the sense of what we're talking about here, but it is public input, and it's putting the questions out to people to find out what they'd like to have and what they'd like to see in their environments, because it's the resource that's coming here, and it's moving forward into other places. And so the first one at the gate has the opportunity to have a say, and I think we should focus on that here to strengthen the region.
Thank you, Butcher. And Ed? You need to unmute yourself again, Ed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Letting the Americans have control over water is a pretty scary thing, and we should do everything we can to minimize it or eliminate it. And I look at recent projects that have happened here. We see the bypass at Brilliant, and when that happened, we had 4 generators of Brilliant that could take care of all the water coming down the Kootenay, except for maybe a little bit of time in the spring. So where does the water come from to turn those generators after all the money we spent? And even worse situation at Juanita. And Juanita and low flows in the summertime, 1 generator turns 4 tenths, 1 turns 9 tenths, and 2 are shut down. Where does the water come from for the Juanita bypass? And if that's controlled by the Americans, we just spent a big pile of money that is not going to have any benefit for people in BC. And that's why we have to control our bloody water ourselves to stop them from, so we can make use of that money we spent. Because as I see it right now, what good is a hydroelectric plant with no water? Because that's where we're at. And we look at what BC Hydro did with the Kootenay bypass. They take all the water, Fortis shuts down plants 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then we pay for them not to make power while they're making power. And when we're talking about power and energy and water, well, what happens with BC Hydro and the Kootenay bypass? Well, that's like driving down the road holding a 5-gallon can out the window, dumping gas on the road and complaining about the gas mileage, because while you're making power, you're paying somebody else not to make it. And there has to be a whole overall scheme of things here to where the people in this part of the world have a benefit of the water that we have. I don't know where the water is going to come from these projects. I don't know how much we can control by what's going on. Are we going to have to triple the height of the Duncan Dam? Are we going to have to triple the height of 7 Mile Dam? Are we going to have to triple the height of High Arrow dams in order to facilitate this Columbia Basin Trust and supply Americans with water as they want, and at the same time we have water for what we need? Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. All right, question number 6. This one is from Helen Davis of New Denver. And she says, our home, planet Earth, is on fire. If elected, what immediate action will you or your party implement to deal with this crisis? And she adds, I do not want an answer that talks about long-term plans. There's no time for that. So we'll start off with Glenn. Glenn, what immediate action will your party implement to deal with the wildfire crisis?
So for me, personally, I've taken a lot of steps in my own day-to-day life to reduce the amount of consumption of goods and fuel. 4 years ago, me and my wife, we have 3 kids. We became a 1-vehicle family. I primarily get around town on my bike and e-bike. And doing that, I know there's a lot of things that we could change very quickly that would let people to make that step, the step that I made 4 years ago. Things like just reducing the speed limit to 25 kilometers an hour or 30 kilometers an hour in residential areas has a significant improvement in safety and reduction in the number of collisions with vulnerable road users. Important steps like that. People a lot of times won't take the step to use very green technologies like biking and e-biking. There's very significant advances in low power vehicles, electric low power vehicles, many which are not legal on our roads. And those restrictions are really limiting the progress that we could be making towards very significant green transportation options. Other things is moving towards consuming services and having a service industry instead of focusing on consuming goods. So we can, instead of everyone having their own home gym, we can have one local gym that supports like 100 people with such a significant reduction in our consumption. Really focusing on that and looking at our day-to-day lives and what changes we can make to reduce the amount of that we're pulling from the planet. That's personally what I think we can do, and a lot of those things we can do very quickly. We can do them right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Glenn Fletcher, what immediate action will you implement or will you implement to deal with the wildfire crisis?
I'd say embedded capacity. I think that the ability to strengthen community response, both through prevention, also through the speed with which you respond to a fire, is the biggest effect that you can have on the fire on the landscape. I mean, we can talk about climate change and we can talk about things that are sort of ethereal in relation to why the forest's burning, but we also have the capacity to directly influence when they burn, how they burn, and what we can do about it at the local level. And so I think, you know, it's not about stopping fire on the landscape. This isn't the removal of fire and sort of a suppression mindset. It's the reintegration of fire into the landscape. I mean, mountain pine beetle wasn't, you know, it wasn't a problem until we stopped the fire suppression on the planet to such a degree that the 80-year-old pine with the perfect bark allowed the pine beetle to live for longer, and then it burnt the forest down. I mean, it just increased the prevalence of fire on the landscape as a result of human interference with the ecological process. And so it's a matter of returning fire to the landscape, recreating the sort of fire breaks around communities that protect those communities, and then the use of the resources that are available at the local level, both in terms of firefighter capacity, but, you know, teaching people about fire safety, teaching people about what to do in relation to a fire if they have to put sprinklers on their homes. I mean, we are in a flammable landscape. I mean, we've done a great amount of fuel treatment. We've done a great amount of sort of mitigation on the landscape. But we live in the Kootenay West region, and we live in the forests in a lot of cases. And so protecting communities and then strengthening the ability to respond is absolutely the best way to treat fire and manage fire at the local level and immediately, rather than, you know, in some conversation about atmospheric conditions that we have no actual direct control over. So.
Thank you, Fletcher. And Ed, our other independent candidate, what immediate action will you implement to deal with the wildfire crisis?
I've been thinking about this for some time now, and I think we can, in BC, we can implement a program where trucking firms or trucks or companies with trucks, corporations with trucks, when they retire them, they turn them over to the high schools. They take them into the high schools, and the students there rebuild them to safety standards. They build them with water tanks on them. They build them with water cannons on them, just like what you see on the ferry boats on the coast. These things can be manned with one driver, one guy on the water cannon, and then you don't have to lay hoses. You can respond to a fire. If we look in BC, everybody's house that's ever burned down, you can drive to it. And from the point of view of the trucks, they can be anything from a single axle to a tandem to a tridem to a four-wheel drive 5-ton to a Super B tanker. And I mean, we've all seen on TV where you can drive down the road and see fire right up to both sides of the highway. What would be a more effective way of putting that fire out than if you can drive down it with a Super B tanker, and under those conditions, you could maybe pull extra trailers, 40 or 50,000 gallons of water, and you could put that fire out and create a fire break at the same time. And these kids, when they enter into this program in school, they can also enter a form of an apprenticeship program so that when they graduate from grade 12, after the 3 years they're in it, they would be a second or third year mechanic apprentice or whatever the apprenticeship they want to get. That would make them more suitable. They'd have marketable skills for weekend and summer work. And I believe every high school in BC could produce one of these trucks every year or more. I have taught mechanics in high school. I know what these kids are capable of. And if you recall, not that long ago, there was a young lady of 13 built a robotic seeing eye dog. Now, if a young person can do that, they can sure as heck build a truck with a squirt gun on it. And I think this is the way we have to do with this kind of stuff. You have to get water to the fire. I recently watched this Talbot Creek fire from my back door. I have never seen, in my opinion, a greater bit of stupidity in my life. Something that should have cost a few $1,000s winds up costing millions. And to me, that is not acceptable. And I have you seen in your paper that in the Valley Voice, I have asked for a full public inquiry into that. And I think we should have full public inquiries into every fire in BC since the Canal Flats fire, because there's circumstances there that go on that are borderline, I don't know what you'd want to call it, irresponsibility, that should be made responsible. People have to be responsible for the paycheck they get in BC. And that's what I think about fighting fires, especially locally. When I lived in Tassis, I had a boss from Costa Rica, wonderful man. His house burned. He lost a 16th century Spanish Bible. And I think about that every time somebody's house burns down. People lose things when their houses burn down that you cannot replace under any circumstances. You might not have a Bible like that, but we all have treasures that we just can't replace no matter what you do. And that's why I think we need to look at this business with trucks with water cannons. We can use them for crowd control in towns. Why can't we use them for fire control? And in the countryside, build enough of these trucks that we have hundreds of them sitting around. Some farms got a building that's heated. They can park a truck in there. So it's close to wherever anything goes. And these trucks can be on call. And the way the government works, any single axle truck can be driven by somebody with a Class 5 driver's license. If necessary, you pull the one drive shaft out of a tandem, you can drive it with a Class 5. You pull 2 drive shafts out of a tridem, you can drive it with a Class 5. So as long as you got a single driving axle, you can drive it with a Class 5. We can man these things with people and somebody with a water cannon, and we can get waters on the fire before you can blink your eye, and maybe we can knock them down, and we can save our bush and our country and everything else. You want to control burn it, but then you have to review what happened in Squamish this summer, where that control burn took out people's houses and got away and did a whole bunch of bad things. So you want to really consider what you control a controlled burn when it gets away and does that kind of damage. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. And Katrina.
Okay, thank you. And thanks, Helen, for this question, because I mean, we all, suffered through the smoke, especially in 2017 in this region. It was just unbelievable and right across the province. And when it comes to public safety and what's happening with fires, we are committed to working with local governments and municipalities, with regional districts, when it comes to mitigation measures. We actually met with UBCM, and we've done a lot of work to work on the wildfire issues. We have substantially acted on about 90% of the Abbott-Chapman report that came out. It was a report written by George Abbott, a former MLA, and Maureen Chapman, quite a well-respected Indigenous leader. And that was following the 2017 fire season. And we have completed about 90% of the recommendations from that report. And it's been tough. I mean, there was no work done by the Liberals after the Filman report was brought in 2008, I think it was. And so we take it seriously. And what we've done is we've been working with the regional districts and just in the Kootenay boundary, Kootenay-Columbia Southeast Fire District, we have been funding since 2017. We have been funding the different communities for different projects. So in 2017, we invested $2.1 million into the Kootenay boundary region to support reforestation efforts. In 2019, almost $1 million supported projects around building resiliency to wildfire threats across the Southeast, as well as an additional $1.4 million to 8 local governments and First Nations to help support wildfire risk. And again, this year we've given grants for wildfire protection, education, planning, fuel management, and fire smart activities, totaling $1.1 million. And those went to the RDCK, the RDKB, Nakusquat grants, the City of Rossland and Silverton. Do we need to do more investments? Yes, we do, but we need to make sure that we are implementing the mediation that needs to take place. Thanks.
Thank you. Before we go on to the next question, I just want to recognize that there are some new attendees. So just want to make sure that everybody knows that in Kootenay West, we do have 6 candidates, but unfortunately 2 of them couldn't come tonight. So we do not have our Green candidate or our Liberal candidate, but we've got Glenn Bile, our Conservative candidate, and Katrina Conroy, our NDP candidate, and Ed Varney, our Independent, and Fletcher Quince, our other Independent candidate. Awesome. Okay, so the next question is on the topic of adventure tourism and resort proposals, and specifically about the Zinkton resort proposal near New Denver. We received several questions on this topic from people in the New Denver area, so I kind of put them all together into this. As you likely know, there's been an increase in commercial adventure tourism and resort proposals for this region, including the controversial Zinkton All-Season Resort. Research on mountain town communities has shown that resorts of this nature often result in a net negative impact to local communities. What is your position on adventure tourism and resort developments for our region? Are you willing to work for a moratorium on further recreational development in this area until there is an overall plan for the backcountry rather than the current piecemeal approach? So we'll start this time with Fletcher.
Yeah, absolutely work towards a moratorium on the backcountry. I mean, again, these are precious resources that we can't get back. I mean, if you go in there and you make a mess of it, even if you don't know, even if it's ignorance that leads to the mess, you know, you can't just go back in and repair it, and you can't put back together that ecosystem. So I think tourism is an extractive industry. I mean, we use it in British Columbia as a service industry to generate jobs and generate revenue for small communities, but it does extract a lot from those communities. I mean, there are people that are going there to recreate and then they leave. And if they don't ever come back, it doesn't mean anything to them. And I think these, you know, resort developments, whether it's Red Mountain and what they want to do in the backcountry around Roslyn, or whether it's Zinkton, you know, the backcountry is a sacred place in the Kootenays, and the backcountry has a special place in terms of the value. And so to go into those areas and say, well, this is now for commercial value, this is now for commercial gain, is a challenging thing. And I think that the small bit of, you know, economic spinoff to the regional communities that receive income from, you know, increased employment, there's probably other options out there that could be invested in just as meaningfully and create just as many opportunities for those communities in more of a visitor sense, and more of a come, stay, experience, and explore and learn about, and not just an adventure tourism. I mean, I've been to Mürren in Switzerland, and I've seen the town, but it's a 300-year-old Swiss farming town. I mean, the evolution of that place and what it became was from the people that started there, and they were, you know, herding goats and sheep and cows long before there was a chairlift anywhere in the vicinity, or it was even a thought of idea, right? And so when you go there and you sit there and you eat the local food and you enjoy the local culture, it's a significantly different idea than just going and building a town from scratch without those values in place. And I think that that's what we have in a lot of cases in Canada, because we don't have established communities inside of these regions. And I think we need to stop and seriously think about where we're building new communities, whether that's, you know, jumbo development or otherwise. Are they necessary? Are they returning value to the community and to the people that are a part of those communities? Or is there a better industry that maintains in place and, you know, as a whole, those ecosystems? So I think that definitely requires a huge amount of public input, and also a good amount of time of just slowing down. And what's the rush? I mean, if it's going to take 50 years to get it right, take 50 years. We don't need it next year. We don't need it in the next 2 or 3 years. You know, it's a long future out there. So that would be my response.
Thank you. Katrina, you're next.
Okay, great. Thanks for this question. And I, you know, of course, I think it's important to support economic development, but I also think that you have to do it with the community in mind. And I think, like as Fletcher said, Jumbo was a perfect example of a community that they tried for years and years and years to develop a recreation site there, a community, and it was not the right place to do it. And I don't know if everybody knows it. It was given status as a actual municipality, and we actually took took that away because there was nobody living there. And government dollars were actually going to the municipality of Jumbo, and there was nobody living there. It was absolutely ridiculous. So it is no longer a municipality, which is a good thing. And the development there will never happen. And I think we have to look at the local community and say, is this the right development for this community? Are there going to be local jobs? And then you have to look at the lands around the development and say, are people still going to have access to those lands? People have been hiking, skiing, backcountry skiing. They've been up in the crown land around those areas for years. Will they still have access to those areas, or will they suddenly find that the development is denying access to local people to those areas? Is it going to actually generate economic development for the region? Is it going to develop economic development for the communities that it's going to be affecting? I think we have to ask all those questions. And until those questions are answered appropriately, until the communities have had a chance to have their say, I don't think we should just go ahead with developments just for the sake of going ahead with a development. So I think Jumbo is a perfect example of that, and one that our government was very vocal about. And I think we need to make sure that Zinkton, if it is going to go ahead, it's going ahead for the benefit of everybody, not just for a very small group of people. Thanks.
Thank you, Katrina. Okay, Ed, you're next.
Am I heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
No, tourism and green economy and environment is a contradiction of terms. I mean, tourism is probably the #1 polluter in the world. If we look at COVID-19 and what it's done and the effect of COVID around the world, shutting down tourism, it's cleaned up half of the world. The oceans and the skies and everything going is a much cleaner, much better place because there's no tourism. So we have to take a long, hard look at tourism and what does it give us? Does it give us, does the good outweigh the bad? We have to do things. And a lot of this tourism is targeted at the high alpine. That is a very delicate environment. That is as delicate as the high Arctic, and that should be avoided at all costs. And then this helicopter mentality that you can go anywhere else on a helicopter. Well, that does not cater to the people of BC. That caters to a few select rich people that can afford to fly in a helicopter. We all can't afford to fly in a helicopter. We need to expose BC for tourism, that everybody in BC should be able to get there for free, as far as I am concerned, because it belongs to all of us. And to shut it off and deactivate roads so that the only way you can get into places is by helicopter at a big expense, well, that cuts that BC off to the majority of the population of this province. And when we're going to develop tourism, we got to look at where we're doing and what we're doing and the long-term effect of it. And it should be, I always maintained it should have to be away from waterways and within a kilometer of the yellow line of a numbered highway, and that's tourism, and beyond that it shouldn't be exploited. And when it comes to helicopters, I've been after the government. I would like to see a no-fly zone, and what I said was a no-fly zone was from Highway 1 to the American border, Kootenay, Columbia in the east, and the Columbia Valley in the west. That's a no-fly zone for helicopters because that's our caribou. And if anything is killing off our caribou, it's helicopters. I was in the Nelson Environmental Office and I said, you want to know where your caribou went? I said, you plot on a graph, increase in helicopter fuel sales, decrease in caribou. And the young guy just turned to me and said, you're preaching to the choir. He said, but I'm not allowed to say anything. We pay his wages to turn around and advise the government on stuff. And then they not only ignore him, they tell him he can't say anything. What are we paying for? And it's helicopters, and a lot of this tourism that we talk about in BC is strictly for rich people that the people of BC can't afford. I watch commercials on TV, oh, Explore BC. How many of those commercials are free to the people of BC, and how many of them are for rich people that can afford to go where they show you on TV? And this is why I have a big problem with tourism in this problem. The people of BC have to come first. If it's accessible to the people of BC, basically no cost other than their own transportation, well then okay. But when it cuts off huge amounts of tracts of lands, so strictly for rich people, I have a big problem with that because it's ours. And what is our basis of a democratic society? It belongs to the people. It's controlled by the people. It's run by the people. Well, taking BC away from the people of BC is not my idea of doing anything good. And tourism does that. And then, like I said before, how bad do we need tourism considering it's the #1 polluter in the world? We talk about industries that pollute. tourism has got to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest one in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Okay, Glenn, what are your thoughts?
Thanks for the question. As a conservative, I believe that the people who know best about making decisions in their areas are the people who live there and the local communities that will be most affected by those developments. So I would be looking to reduce the provincial influence on those and trust more in the local groups, the local communities, and they know the best about their areas, and to give them the power around making those decisions, having less influence from the higher levels of government. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Glenn. Okay, the 8th question is from Fran Wallace of Silverton. Here it is. Our oceans are polluted with plastic, a fossil fuel product. As a result of this pollution, the basic hydrological cycle is seriously jeopardized, contributing further to the climate crisis. How and when are you and your party prepared to phase out plastic use? This one will start with you, Ed.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Well, I think this plastics thing is a byproduct of tourism as well, because when you're at home and you're dealing with your garbage, you take care of it. But when people are out, they tend not to. They just turf it loose or throw it out the window or do whatever with it, and nothing, it just goes. There's, you know, and so this is something else. So with tourism, we have to watch where garbage goes and what happens with it. And we watch about recycling on TV. They take it across the ocean and they burn it over there. It doesn't make it. It's recycling isn't cutting it. Yeah, we can cut down on plastics, but we just have to clean up after ourselves and do a better job. And there's just no end of what we do to pollute Mother Earth. I don't know. It was a very interesting show that was on about years ago about On Deadly Ground with Steven Seagal, and he talked about major companies dumping stuff in the ocean where the maximum fine every day was $25,000, but they could dump millions of dollars worth of stuff in the ocean, and it was the cheapest way to go. And it's the same thing with plastics. It's about making money, and people just don't want to clean up after themselves, and that's where it has to be. It eliminate plastics, yes, but we have what else is going to become garbage then? The one thing about paper is, yeah, in time it does disintegrate and go away, but we don't need plastics, do we? We have glass jars that unfortunately do break, and people can get hurt on glass jars. But plastic, cardboard, well, at least if it deteriorates in time, it goes away. I guess that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you, Ed. And Glenn, you're up next.
Yeah, the plastic issue is an interesting one for me as someone who was a pretty militant recycler my whole life, and then to find out that a lot of the plastic that I've been recycling, just gotta recycle, it ends up not being processed in a very environmentally friendly way, and realizing that the best way to stop having plastic ending up in our environment is just to reduce the amount of plastic, since it's not always being recycled properly. We're going to be known as the plastic age, with how much plastic we've been using, how much of it's in the environment. For me, that's kind of, to me, that's embarrassing. I don't want to be known as that. I'd rather be known for technology, not on plastic use and how prevalent it was and how much it's polluted. So I'd like to be known as the generation that really stopped our plastic use and moved to reducing that. And a lot of that is just moving production of our goods more locally, having more local supply of food, needing less packaging to keep it fresh. And yeah, I'd really like to see us move away from plastic and to more environmentally sustainable and friendly products. Thanks.
Thanks. Thanks, Glenn. Okay, Katrina.
Hey, thank you. So our government is taking this really seriously. It's an issue it's a worldwide issue, but we recognize that we can do something right here in BC, and we're going to begin the phase out of single-use plastics province-wide, which will really help to create healthier homes and healthier planet, healthier province. We've also been working around the issue of debris in the oceans, which is just an incredible situation. It's disgusting when you see how much plastic is out there in the ocean, and people have just discarded it. And so we are also working on that. And Sheila Malcolmson, the MLA from Nanaimo, is taking the charge on that and doing consultation, working with people. And one of the most interesting things, I'm going to give a plug here. I was at the farmers market in Castlegar recently, and here's a young woman. She's in grade 12. And her and a group of young people have started a company, and they're in the process of getting funding for it. And one of the young fellows has developed a way of being able to eat plastic, to get rid of it and make it a biodegradable thing that we can utilize in ways that are so incredible. And the enthusiasm and passion from these young people and what they're doing. I mean, she got explaining it and got into physics and stuff, and I said to her, it was a bit beyond me. I had to sit down and talk to her in a much longer discussion, but it's just so incredible to see that passion with them and what they're inventing to make sure that they can do this to make the world a better place. So we will start with getting rid of single-use plastics, and we will keep working on it, because it is a huge issue, and we need to do something about it for a better planet, a better province, and better for our kids and grandkids. So thanks for the question.
Awesome. Fletcher.
Yeah, reduce, reuse, recycle, right? So, I mean, reduction, single-use plastics. Roslyn had just gone through a plastic bag ban when it got to the point of COVID hitting, and plastic bags came rushing back into the grocery stores and into the liquor stores. And it was interesting to watch people's behaviors change. I mean, people had gotten used to bringing their reusable bag. It didn't bother anybody. People were quite happy taking the cardboard box, right? I mean, there's ways around using them long before you get to the recycling of them. And there's also ways of making them. I mean, whether that's investments in green technologies like bioplastics or biodegradable plastics, or things that have less of an impact on the environment through time. I mean, those are the industries that British Columbia can focus on. I mean, those are investments that can be made by the government to increase economic opportunities for the people that live here while reducing the impact on the environment. So I think there's plenty of good ways out there to mitigate plastic use. Reducing is, it's a good way forward. Reusing, if we're able to start building things from plastics, maybe it's the reuse of the bags or the reuse of the containers into other things. It doesn't have to be simply the reuse of your refillable jug. I mean, that jug can be turned into something else and maybe have another life in another form, right? And again, long before you get to the recycling and just sort of the putting of it back into the system where it's not necessarily dealt with well, and where there's a huge tax on the water and on the energy requirements to do the recycling in the first place. And the plastics they're pumped out, they're cheap, they're easy. It's not that big of a headache. It's not that much of an inconvenience to move away from them, but it does have to be policy, and it does have to be pressure from a government in order to do it. People do what they can, but it's always easier to go get that extra cup from the coffee shop, right? I mean, it's easy to take the plastic lid rather than not take the plastic lid because you're worried about spilling your cup. But if you can begin to move away from those, and we're in a difficult time, and with COVID, it's going to be a long time, I think, before we start seeing the ability for people to return to having reusable bags in grocery stores, which I think is unfortunate, but a necessary precaution. So, I think it's stalled a little bit. Certainly Roslyn's been at the forefront in terms of the adoption of the banning of single-use plastics, along with Victoria. And I think it just, people are aware of it. People are conscious of it. And now it's a matter of getting people to sort of follow through with it in line with what they're able to do and the social conditions associated with it. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we are going to do 2 more questions. Both of these questions were crafted by the Valley Voice reporter John Boivin. And the first one is, The Columbia Basin Broadband Corporation is currently wading through permitting to get their main fiber optic line up the valley to deliver high-speed internet to the area. However, there's no agreement or mechanism in place to deal with the last mile, getting the signal from the trunk line to people's homes. What would your government do to facilitate this important last step? So we will call on Katrina first.
Well, I was really excited when we did make the announcement that we were taking broadband right up the valley, right up just up past Nakusp, and then I've been hearing of the issues that have been coming up of how to get it up there. That there's some issues of that the getting it there is creating issues. And along with that last mile. So it's fine to get the broadband through, but if you can't connect your community to it, if your community can't afford it, or if people can't afford it, we need to do something. To that end, one of our platform issues is that we're bringing forward is around connectivity. We have invested millions of dollars in connectivity because we recognize how important it is, but COVID has made us recognize how even more important it is, because all of us now are getting used to doing meetings by Zoom. We're working from home. We even did the legislature from home this summer. People don't realize that we actually sat from the middle of June till the middle of August, and I did it all from my home. I didn't go to Victoria. I was home for the entire time, and I didn't miss a day of the legislature, and it worked for us. And so it's saving. I mean, it's incredible what we can do with connectivity. So part of our package that we're putting forward as our recovery package is ensuring that there is funding for more connectivity. And I am lobbying hard to make sure that we have funds for that last mile, because it's critically important. It's fine to have that broadband coming up through your community, but if you don't have the ability to connect, it doesn't really make sense. So I've been lobbying long and hard for that. The people know my stance on it. It's important for rural BC. It's really important for our communities, and we know how important it is now with COVID and the need for connectivity. So thanks for the question. It's really important, and you're right, John. We got to get that last mile done. So thanks.
Thank you, Katrina. Okay, next, Glenn.
Hi, I'm not super familiar with this issue. But from what you said, it sounds like there's a permitting issue with the bringing the broadband in. I'd like to see more power to local groups to dictate how businesses operate in their area, and to not have to always go to higher levels of government to get approval. And so that's what my focus would be: giving power to local communities, local groups, people who are trying to better their communities and their cities. That's what my focus would be. Thanks.
Thank you, Glenn. Okay, Fletcher.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, Columbia Basin Broadband Corporation, as a part of Columbia Basin Trust, if they're trying to get the backbone in place and connect into the last mile of people's homes, I know with CBBC, when they came into Roslyn, they did the last mile for us and connected a building that had 15 tenants, and it was great. I mean, there was funding available for it, and it was a necessary thing, because the cost to every single consumer versus the bulk purchasing of installation through service providers by the people who were doing the top-down direction of the main line in the first place is a very efficient way of delivering that last mile. It was interesting in Roslyn to watch Shaw and TELUS kind of pick up their heels and run quickly to get it installed, their own lines, when CBBC first came to town. And so it is a bit of a market dynamics. I mean, you are entering into a business marketplace where there are other service providers. I know that the Slocan Valley is, it's not connected in a sense, and it is in a position where that main line of CBBC is going to be hugely influential to the region and hugely influential to the ability for people to move there, live there, and work there. And so as far as the government's direct hand in CBBC, maybe they're working hand in hand with CBBC to start delivering that last mile to people's homes. But it is a corporation that's operating, in a marketplace with other providers. And I think that there's ways to, encourage those other providers to move forward. And certainly that's what CBBC has done throughout the region. And I think it's fantastic to have the connectivity throughout the region and working provincially to rebates, or whether they're associated with your tax bills or is paid out over time, so people can do that and make that transition, I think is a very positive reflection of the values and also of the communities that's going into. So yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, Fletcher. So Ed, what would you do to facilitate the last mile in the valley? Oh, you're muted.
I kind of smiled to myself when this question came up, because for me personally, it's not that much of a priority. I'm a person that goes up the back end of the Duncan to go trapping, and I can go up there for weeks and never see or never talk to anybody, and it doesn't phase on me. It doesn't bother me. And I know other people that if they go 10 minutes without seeing somebody or talking to them, they have a problem. And we have to serve all the people of this province. And if this is what people need, if this is what their personal life has to have in it, well, then we have to help provide that for them. Because once again, this is a democracy. We're working for all the people, not just one or two. And I think this is where this democracy in Canada has been failing us for years. It doesn't work they're not interested in working for everybody. They have select people they choose to work for, and not everybody. So yes, we should do what we can to get this to the people that want it. That's what I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Good, okay, that's that one. Okay, last question. Craft cannabis growers say there are still too many barriers for them to enter competitively into the cannabis market. What would you do to help local growers legally grow, sell, and market their products? First up is Fletcher.
Yeah, it's a huge part of the economy of the Kootenays, and it has been for a very, very long time. I think that to not reflect on that and not appreciate that, or understand the influence it's had on the communities and the growth of those communities and the resilience of those communities would be a mistake. Legalization is a transition. There's a skill set and a knowledge set in the valley and in the region that can apply itself and can create new economic opportunities. So working with the federal government, working with the provincial government, and trying to get licenses in place and facilitate those craft growers should be a priority. If we can create industry and we can market skills that are here and knowledge that's here, make the most of it and utilize it. And whatever decreases those barriers and increases the ability of those individuals to enter the marketplace, it's no different than the last mile of fiber. Make it work for those people that want to be there, that genuinely have an interest in it and are trying to move it forward. So, deregulation in a sense, I think is a healthy way to go in some places with business. I think government spends too much time influencing small business, putting in place regulations. I think deregulation in some regards is healthy. This is a very tricky industry. I wouldn't advocate for complete deregulation, but I would certainly say that, allowing those craft suppliers, and whether it's growing or whether it's distillation or whether it's the packaging, because we're starting to figure out reusable packaging that we're sending out rather than the stuff that is now currently required. I think those are options and opportunities here, and I think we should encourage it in any way we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrice. Next up is Glenn.
So as a conservative, I want to reduce the regulations on barriers on small businesses. Obviously with cannabis, has to be consideration for safety. But definitely I want to see small businesses succeed, reduce the tax load on them for operating as a business properly, reducing the barriers and the bureaucracy that they have to go through, things that increase the cost and make it difficult for a small business to be viable. And yeah, with this industry, making sure that there's safety controls with youth. But definitely from a small business point of view, reducing the tax load on small businesses, reducing the bureaucratic hoops that they have to go through to make it easier to be successful. Thanks.
Thank you, Glenn. Ed, you're next.
Yeah, marijuana. I mean, where it's a competitive market, but when it gets down to you can grow for yourself, that means you don't have to buy it. It's like growing vegetables. If you grow them yourself, you don't have to buy it. And I mean, that's what the challenge in the market is. You have to be able to provide for market for people who can't buy it for themselves. The thing of it is, in this part of the world, most people can buy whatever they grow, whatever they need for their own use. So at what point do you have to price marijuana to the point where it becomes a viable product, or how far are you going to export it? But apparently the whole country is in the same shape and people just grow it and buy it as they need. And there's not really any regulation on it other than the fact that you can't grow to grow it for yourself. You can do that. You can't grow it to sell it without permits and everything else. But it's such a gray area, and how do you even begin to police it, right? I mean, you look at your neighbor. Well, maybe he'll grow 2 plants for you and one for himself or whatever. And it's such, unless you're going to, I don't know what you would do to control that industry, because anybody that's got a pot with a plant in it can grow marijuana, and that's what you're up against in something like this, to try and regulate it and make it so it's a productive thing. What are you going to do? You just literally have to give it away. Well, if you're giving it away, well, then you can't afford to produce it. You can't afford a greenhouse. You can't pay the power. You can't pay the heat or anything else. And my first opinion on this, when they come in commercial grow ops for marijuana, I always said they should have to grow a food crop of equal value in order to get a permit to do it in the first place anyways. But as for marijuana, I don't see how you're going to make it so that you can legislate it or control it or do anything about it. I think you're just chasing your tail around in circles, and it's just going to be an exercise in frustration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed and Katrina.
So this is a really interesting question, because of course this is a big part of our economy, and especially in Kootenay West. People think it's a big part of the economy in the entire Kootenays, but it's particularly in Kootenay West. We have we have about 2,500 producers in our region, and marijuana is legal. The federal government has made it legal, so we have the responsibility as a provincial government to figure out how are we going to make sure that not only is the people selling it doing it appropriately, only not selling to minors, all of those guidelines, but also how do we bring the growers who have been doing this for years and have some pretty good quality in our region into the legal commodity. And so what we've done is we've actually funded Community Futures, Essential Kootenay Community Futures, $675,000 to work with local growers to bring them into the legal market, to transition them. It's called the Cannabis Transition Project. We're hoping that it'll support about 100 clients over the next few years to make sure that we can get that Kootenay, I don't know what you call it. There's so many names for marijuana grown in the Kootenays. Is it Kootenay Green, Kootenay Gold, Kootenay? I mean, you hear about it everywhere. And we want to make sure that that gets on the shelves. It's a viable industry for our farmers here. It's a viable industry for the people that are growing. They know what they're doing. There's years of experience here. We don't want to lose that. So we want to make sure that when you go into a local shop, that you can see the Kootenay Green on the store shops and on the shelves, so that they can buy that. And I think that's really important. And I think we should support the growers in our region to become legalized, and to support them in a way that helps them to transition. And it's good for our economy, it's good for our region, and it's good for the families that are involved. So thanks.
Thank you. Okay, now we're into the wrap up. So each candidate now has got 2 minutes to wrap up. And we'll start with Fletcher with this one.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for participating tonight, and thank the other candidates for putting their name forward, and Katrina specifically for years of service. I think you've done a great job representing the people of the West Kootenays. And I feel like moving forward, it's an opportunity for people to return independence to the Legislative Assembly. Running as an independent, it's about having the freedom to speak your mind, not under party politics, not getting into bipartisanship, listening to the community, being conscious and available and aware of what's going on in the community around you. And bringing that forward and bringing it forward so that people can hear the stories of the place that you're from and the stories of the environment that you're working in. But, to be independent in Kootenay West would be to be self-reflective, to sit back and look at what we're doing here and focus on making ourselves sustainable, not trying to solve provincial, federal, international level issues, but really working on the grassroots that make our communities whole and make the families that live in them whole. And I think that that's, increasingly the way people would like to see politics treated. I think they'd like to see it be a return to policy that reflects the values and the interests of the local populations, whether that be through more direct democracies type things like referendums, public input questions, increased engagement through social media is one thing, but so is the online engagement platforms. I mean, Zoom has been an amazing tool for people to talk and share information and communicate when they can't be together, but it's moving forward and bringing the people of Kootenay West, into the Legislative Assembly, creating models here that can influence provincial policy and influence federal policy by being, independent, by being our own thing, by being our own identity, and by working together to really strengthen what's here and the foundations of what's been built here over the last 120 years. 130 years that the Kootenays has sort of been growing. I'm sitting in a building that's 120 years old because Roslyn was an incredibly important place back at that time. And I feel like the Kootenays as a whole, but the Kootenay West specifically, moving forward is going to play an incredibly important role in the future of the planet. I think that people increasingly see the values that are here, that the people have, but also the values of the ecosystem, the value of of the society and of the community. And those things, those values, I think, are really going to start to influence others. And all summer long, it was people from elsewhere coming through the Kootenays and seeing this place and saying, wow, I didn't know this was here. Normally I went south of the border, right? And those people were stopping at the real estate offices and looking at the prices and going, wow, this is cheap. I could buy here. Slocan, if they do the waterfront development and they do it right, it's going to be a jewel, and it's going to be a jewel of British Columbia. And I'd be honored to be a part of that. And it's just a matter of bringing those voices and bringing the values of the communities forward. And I would really be honored to take the baton and move forward at this point and represent the people here. So, like I said, I wish everybody the best in this, and certainly respect Katrina for the years of service. It's just, what are we doing? Are we parties, or are we people? And are we able to speak in our own independence, or do we need the banners? So that's my summary. And I hope everybody in the next week gets out and votes anyway, regardless for who. Thank you.
Thanks, Fletcher. And Ed.
I'd like to thank everybody for this opportunity. It has been an important presentation to the public, what everybody thinks. Everybody has a right to choose and have an idea what everybody is about. We have to serve democracy better. And I think democracy as a whole is failing a lot of people because it doesn't answer a lot of questions and it doesn't serve a lot of people. It is serving special interest groups and rich people. And a lot of people are getting left behind. When you think about it, that 80% of the people in Canada can't pay their bills or almost can't pay their bills. Well, somebody is taking over, and they don't want people to succeed in this country. And it's kind of a sad thing because the way I put it, we've got governments in this country that created a country where we can no longer afford to live. We can only wait to die. And that's a sad realization when you have to look, when you sit down and you look at the facts and the statistics, that we can't do better than this. We had a forest industry in BC that was second to none in the world. And 45 years ago, I was in Vancouver and a man told me in an airport in a very well-dressed suit, he said the BC forest economy was an economic base that would make BC a powerful province. The people in Eastern Canada did not want that to happen, so they set out to destroy the BC forest base. As a person who has worked all over BC in the forest industry and seen what I could consider sheer stupidity, but when you look at it from deliberately destroying the industry, that's the only thing that makes sense. And I looked at the hydroelectric power. We sell it to the States and we buy it back at double the price. We see what goes on with the dams here in Canada. Doesn't make sense to me. And we looked, and I heard a nasty rumor about the coal industry. Somebody said they stopped exploring for coal in the Flathead because they're going to come in underground from the States and take it. Well, if you start an underground railroad from the States, where's it going to end? Tumbler Ridge? That's the one thing in BC that's a bright spark, is our coal mines where people are making a living wage. Nobody else in BC hardly is. And I'm really concerned about what's going on in this province and around the world. Alberta just got back into the coal industry because there's money in it. But are we going to lose it in the East Kootenays because of this? It scares me. And I've looked at all these different industries that are controlled outside of Canada, and the people we elect to office are letting it happen. And it bothers me to big time, and I don't know how long it's going to last, how long what we got is going to be sustainable, and how much longer we can have it. But I would like to say one thing before I close. When everybody goes to the polls on the 24th or thereabouts, I want to remind everybody about last winter, road conditions, and we have 9 more years to go. And when we have roads maintained, the closed Highway 1, Highway 3, and Highway 5, and Highway 5 was closed so they can make movies, that is something that concerns me. Because that's not what we maintain highways to that standard. They're making movies of crashes on Highway 5 and holding up traffic for that while the other 2 highways are closed. We have to have highways maintenance. And it has to change so that we have highways maintenance. It's taken too many lives. I lived when we had Department of Highways. John Horgan talked about Department of Highways and then let us down. And I don't think that should ever have happened.
Thank you very much, Ed. Okay, Katrina, you're next.
Thanks, Jan. And again, thank you to you and to Valley Voice, to the Chamber, to the Hospice Society, everybody who made this possible tonight. And thank you for the questions from the people that sent them in. They were great questions. And I also want to thank my fellow candidates, the ones who made it tonight. I want to thank you for the respectful dialogue. It is a different kind of campaign, and it's not always easy to do this by Zoom, but it was great to hear your answers. And I did learn from some of your answers as well. And I just wanted to say that I think it's important that if there's so many issues we didn't have a chance to talk about tonight, please go online and look at our fully costed platform. And it's got the issues around forestry, how we're dealing with that, and education, everything from early childhood education, from K to 12, right through to post-secondary, how we're going to make things better for people in this province, because that's what our whole goal is to make things better for people. It's interesting when just before Christmas last year, the Premier said to us, go home, spend time with your families and decide if you want to run again. And I did that. And I had a discussion with family and friends and supporters and people that had been advising me for a number of years and asking them, did I want to run again? And I was asking for inviting input. And it was in, we had back and forth with it. And it was in March when we were talking, when I was home quite a bit for a change. And we were talking about the issues in our region and talking about, the issues with healthcare, talking about the issues with education and the forestry. And we were talking about the Columbia River Treaty. And I recognize that how much I still want to be the voice for the region. I want to be the person that is going to be at the table, the person that is going to take your issues to Victoria. And my husband said to me, you still have the passion, you do need to run again. So I am running again because I still have the passion. I still want to be your voice. I still want to be your advocate in Victoria. So please, if you haven't already voted by mail, which many people have done, you can vote starting today right through the 21st in advance polls. And it's in the Bosom Hall in the Cusp and in the Legions in Castlegar Trail and Rossland, or Nakusp Legion. And you all should have got one of these if you're registered in the mail, one of these cards. And I just, I really want to thank everybody. And if you haven't voted, if you're not going to vote in advance and you're going to vote on the 24th, please consider voting for me, because I would be deeply honored to once again be your voice in Victoria and be your advocate there and continuing on doing the good things we need to do in Kootenay West for everybody here. So thanks again.
Thank you, Katrina. Glenn.
Thanks, Janan, for everyone who put this together. Thanks to the candidates who all were here answering questions. It was really nice to see so many people passionate about our area and our community. I'm just going to say again that I'm running because I want to leave our province in a good position environmentally and financially for future generations. I want to empower people to make good environmental choices. I want to reduce the burden on our small businesses. I want to see our small businesses thriving, and I want to see power taken from higher levels of government and given to the local governments who know best how to use our tax dollars the most effectively. I'm 33 years old. I'm younger than all the MLAs were when Parliament was dissolved. If you want to have more young voices in Parliament, I'm an excellent choice for that. I have young kids. I understand the issues young families and young people are facing. And I'm really passionate about improving our communities and leaving a bright future for future generations. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, candidates, for coming. Thank you to the people who submitted the questions. Thank you so much to the attendees, of course, and for my little team here that's helping out with Zoom and the technical part of things. And we are going to post this on the Valley Voice YouTube channel. So the link to that will be on our Facebook page and our website. That'll be hopefully by tomorrow. And yes, as some of you have said, advance voting started today. Election day is October 24th. So we really hope that everybody gets out to vote. And it was great. Thank you so much and good night.